各位观众，欢迎收看你这一集的《谁来尬聊》。你们看，其实今天这一集非常特别通常都是我们会有请来宾来讲说，欢迎收看《谁来尬聊》，所以我来了。可是今天呢，因为我们的来宾不太会讲中文，所以呢，就由我来开头。我们今天呢，很荣幸可以请到从乌克兰来的 Alexander Litvinenko。Okay, I think I pronounced the name pretty good.
Yes.
It was good. Probably the best so far, right?
Yes, you're right.
Mr. Alexander, welcome to be on the show. Want to thank you for being here. You flew all the way from Ukraine. You're here. You've been here in the States and for a few days. I understand that you are actually a minister. You're a pastor. Is that correct?
A minister.
Minister. So do you pastor a church in Ukraine, or you're just part of the pastoral team in the church?
I'm part of a team, but my main occupation is international partnership and communication at the Ukrainian Evangelical Theological Seminary.
Okay, so you're actually also a seminary professor.
Yes, it can be said that way.
Okay. Now, I think we're very honored to have you here. I think for the past 3 years, the war has been going on in Ukraine. I think for a lot of us, we see just news clips, interviews, photos and videos of what's going on in Ukraine. Now, because you've been there, how long have you been? I mean, you were born and raised in Ukraine.
Yes, I was born and raised in Ukraine.
Okay. Now these past 3 years, I would assume, it's been living like hell, maybe in Ukraine, or is that just an understatement? How is it like living in Ukraine these past 3 years?
Well, I think I like words to describe that. Of course, it's different with different people, but we never expected it to come. Me personally, I did not believe the war would start. And a day before, or 2 days before the war, my friends came over and asked, "What about the war?" Well, I said, they're just trying to frighten us or whatever, but I didn't believe because it was so illogical to my mind and made no sense, especially nowadays.
Right.
But when it started, that was awful. And to say that is nothing to say. All those missiles and drones,
right,
dogfighting and everything, and so many losses, so many casualties, and like this.
Now, I heard somebody said that when you were passing by the airports and you hear airplanes flying overhead, it just almost triggers an anxiety in you, correct?
Yes, that's correct. I still cannot get used to it, to the sound of airplanes, because in our area, if you hear something like that, that's a drone, and those drones, every other night you wake up to explosions, air defense, machine guns, all those missiles and propellers, and you just feel like finding a hiding place somewhere immediately. That's true.
So you guys always need to be ready to just get your stuff and hide somewhere whenever you hear sirens?
Actually, yes, but not everyone has a basement, a bomb shelter. In our house, we don't have a basement, so we don't have anywhere to hide.
Now, do you live in Kyiv?
Yes. So my family, we live in Kyiv outskirts, not far from Kyiv, but that's Kyiv area.
Outskirts. So tell me a little bit more about the seminary. How did you get connected with the seminary?
Yes, of course. It happened 10 years ago, and that was not something I planned in my life. I was faculty at a secular university, but all of a sudden my mom got sick at the beginning of a school year, and I had to take care of her as the only child. So I suspended, my involvement. And later, when my mom got better, a vacancy popped up,
At the seminary?
Okay. Yes, and I filled that vacancy because it was a mid-school year. And at first, that was like that, but eventually, gradually, step by step, the more time I spent at the seminary, the more I fell in love with the seminary, people working there, faculty, staff, and what's the most important, its mission. So its mission gradually became my mission and my calling. And today I'm really thankful to God for this opportunity to be a part of this wonderful team and doing things we do.
Now, we talked about seminary. Now, for these past couple of years during the war, how has has the seminary students' enrollment decreased or increased, or how does seminary play the role in Ukraine?
That's a paradox, but today we have the highest number of students ever. Yes, but let me go back and say that the seminary has been affected by the war too, because our campus is just next to Bucha. You must have heard about, with all those mass executions there of civilians. Yes, and it was in a gray zone. Russian troops on the one side, Ukrainian troops on the other side, and 6 missiles landed on our campus and it was severely damaged. We had to replace windows, doors, lines, and roofs. But with God's help and due to the support of our partners, we managed to rebuild.
So you guys still have classes
Yes.
going on through all these years?
So classes were suspended, of course, but after the liberation of those areas around Kyiv, we resumed our classes due to some COVID experience, because we had all those online learning tools at our disposal and some experience already. And we had, before the war, we had residential and non-residential programs. And of course, for some time, when the war started and we resumed our classes, we resumed non-residential format, online learning. Today we have around 700 students.
Wow.
Yes, some of them are the most of them are from Ukraine. They are non-residential, different programs, 25 programs. They come to our campus for study sessions, 2-week study sessions. But that's mostly 4 or 5 times a year, but mostly or between sessions, that's online.
Now, wow, that's amazing. So to hear that after the liberation, you guys resume classes and the enrollment is actually greater than before. People coming either to online or coming to the campus for classes and things like that. There are even more people than before.
Yes, that's a paradox, that's a miracle, but that's true. And let me say without exaggeration that today Ukraine is in great need of new ministers, chaplains, missionaries, counselors, new leaders. And this need is great. And people come, and our mission is to train and equip them for their ministry to their suffering fellow citizens, church, and society.
Now, Ukraine is actually a very interesting country, a very interesting place. Why I say that is because Christianity is actually the majority of the population in Ukraine. Now, how has the belief, or how has the faith, or how has the church actually helped just the people there in Ukraine during the wartime?
Thank you for your question. Yes, Ukraine is considered to be a Christian state. That's true. But the bulk of the population, they consider themselves to be Orthodox Christians and Orthodox Church, in Ukraine, of course. But let me admit that for many people, of course, there are sincere believers among them. Right. That's true, and respect that. But for many people, that's merely a cultural belonging or tradition. To come to church just once a year for Easter service, it's like this. But as far as Protestant churches and believers, evangelical Christians in particular, Yes, of course, their number is not that
Mm-hmm.
big, and I cannot say exactly. Yeah, today, especially with all those things around,
Right.
migrating, immigrating, and but these are Protestant churches, evangelical Christians, believers who got really actively involved in relief ministry at the beginning of the war. Churches turned into hubs, hosting refugees, internally displaced people, providing help, assistance, and it really changed the attitude towards Protestant and evangelical Christians in our country. And it did not go unnoticed by the government and our society.
Now, would you say that because of the war, actually there are more people who are willing to go to church now because they feel like they need somebody to pray to, or they need to have somebody to depend on even more now?
Yes, that's right. Just one example. I go to my hometown often because my dad is there. And just one small church, 100 members. My friend is a pastor there. But every Sunday, 200 people come, internally displaced mostly.
Wow.
So this is one example, and
just
it's
come
true
to have
about
church
many
service.
churches in Ukraine. That's true.
So people's faith actually increased during the wartime.
I think yes.
Okay.
Generally speaking, yes. Of course, it can be different with different people. Some people might have got angry with God, not understanding what's going on, but with some people, it's just the opposite. It draw them closer to God. That's true. And we have many graduates as students serving all around Ukraine, network of churches. Yeah. And when we hear testimonies, and recently, yes, another testimony, internally displaced people joining local churches, accepting Christ, and becoming active ministers. And these are real stories, many testimonies like that.
Because they want to become active ministers because they feel like they receive something?
Yes.
And they want to be able to help other people?
Yes. They enjoyed help. They saw the love of Jesus. Yeah. And then they decided to show that to others.
Wow, that's really amazing. I think in a time like this, most people, they would start, being angry, being afraid, want to hide. But in what you're telling me is that there are actually more people who are willing to come out and to help people.
Yes.
Now, for the churches in Ukraine, besides housing these internally displaced people, what other work are the churches in Ukraine doing to help these people?
Yes, relief work. That's important. Of course, you've heard about blackouts and power outages in the last 2 years when the Russian army was trying to target critical infrastructure, power plants and power grids and, all those things, and darkness, and people were in great need of the winterization items such as firewood, wood stoves, no heating, no hot water, no water, electricity.
Because it does get pretty cold during the winter time in Ukraine.
Yeah, that's true. And churches got involved in providing these things. People often came to churches because there were power generators there just to charge their phones and to get warm, get hot tea or something. That's true. Another area, let me just mention some. Sure. That's counseling. People needed not only food, they needed Christian care, counseling. So ministers of different churches and our faculty at the seminary, and they provided that counseling, that support. For example, one of the programs since the beginning of the war, hot meals. When our faculty and staff, we came back to our campus, there were so many people in our neighborhood who did not have money, no stores, no possibility to buy anything. So our cafeteria started making hot meals, and hundreds of people used to come. And it wasn't just about sharing a meal, our faculty staff. We sat, we supported, asked questions whenever appropriate, of course. And there was a prayer, Lord's Prayer, asked for their prayer needs, requests, their personal needs. And another story, just one example, let me share it because it's really touching. There was a guy in our neighborhood, and for many, many years before the war, he had been skeptical about Christianity and about the seminary. And he just criticized, and he did not like that. But when the war started, he came for a hot meal, joined a crowd of people. And I don't remember his name, but and what happened next. But I know that he joined local church gathering in our chapel on Sundays. So this drastic, tremendous change, that's something that's especially encouraging.
Now, you're saying you guys have to cook all these warm meals. I'm sure you guys are cooking hundreds of
Thousands
a day, thousands a day.
Not a day,
Okay.
not a day. Yes, but
hundreds. Okay, thousands a month. Are you guys still able to get all these resources, the supplies you guys need into the church and also into the seminary campus?
Yes, some people came to our campus, to our cafeteria. Then our relief team took some of those hot meals to the neighborhood, food packages and hot meals. And today, this work is still underway, taking food packages and hot meals.
Wow.
Because there are different people in Ukraine, and of course there are people who can afford today already many things, but there are many vulnerable groups, and it's very different for them.
Now, the day-to-day life in Ukraine right now, is it, do people still go to school? People still go to work? What is it like?
Let me say it in the following way. Of course, there are categories of the population close to the front line, and it's very different there. They are surviving there. As far as the rest of the country, even you are far away from the front line, you try to live your normal life because you cannot do it otherwise. Yes, people try to work. Children go to schools. Very often they study online if a school doesn't have a bomb shelter or something. Yes, but even this, even you are far from the front line, you live under tremendous pressure for such a long time. Drones, missiles, you wake up to explosions and you never know where it's going to fall. I know in my neighborhood, here, there, demolished, destroyed buildings and people killed while asleep. Everywhere, the same. And moreover, you have people killed, civilians, military, people you knew. In our church, at the end of each service, we pray for around 30, maybe more, people from our church who've been drafted, for example, who are in the army. And I know at least 4 of them who got killed. And these are people we serve together in Sunday school camps. And these are people you communicated, you were friends, you talked a lot, you discussed things, and then all of a sudden, they're gone. That's why this pressure, and it hurts, it's really painful, and I think everyone in Ukraine is under this pressure and trauma.
I'm sure it's a lot of pressure, anxiety,
yes,
worry still. Yes. Just like when you say you hear planes flying overhead, you feel like you want to find a place to hide a bomb shelter or something like that because it might be a missile or a drone.
Yes, that's true. Still cannot get used to it.
So I'm sure a lot of people are living their life like that.
Under tremendous pressure.
Now, last thing you said that there's still a tremendous need for ministers, right? Pastors in Ukraine. Now, do they have to be able to speak Ukrainian or like English? Would that be able to do, or they have to be able to speak the language to be able to help and minister there?
Any help is welcome, of course, but what I meant was that the seminaries is training, equipping Ukrainian ministers, yes, counselors, pastors, chaplains. That's a new area for us, which is of great importance today, especially with everything going on. And our army needs chaplains, people who would come and counsel and support, and so much, trauma.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, for the people who are watching online, for the viewers, how can the viewers, if they want to be able to help, what do you think? What are some of the ways that they can help the people there?
That's a good question. Thank you so much.
I'm sure prayer is one thing. I'm sure a lot of people definitely pray for your safety.
Yes.
For the safety of the ministers there and the people who are helping.
There are several ways to do that. And as you mentioned, thank you, prayer is of primary importance. We believe in the power of prayer. And I think that Ukraine would have fallen a long time ago if it had not been a miracle, because it's been more than 3 years, not 3 days.
Yeah,
that's
true. People thought it was going to end in a few weeks.
That's true. Yeah. Then I think advocating in a way, if it's possible, that's also welcome, because there are many things we hear today which have nothing to do with reality, are not true about Ukraine and what Ukrainians feel. Because just in a few words, Ukraine obviously is a victim in this situation. And we know our history, and we understand that it's not only about land. I mean, it's not even about right to speak our own language or have our own culture. It's not just about our identity that we can lose. It's about our existence, so it's very existential, because we know our history and what was before, and we understand that very well. So just being truthful and saying things which are true, actually, And of course, churches in Ukraine and our seminary in particular, there are we need resources to continue our ministry in different ways, both relief ministry and educational ministry, training more and more counselors, pastors to fill in, or chaplains, army chaplains, yes. So there are different ways.
Now, if somebody watching says, hey, I really want to go and help Ukraine, and they buy a ticket to go to Ukraine, would you encourage that?
Well, such a person, of course, must understand what's going on in Ukraine. Yes, the war is underway, and it's not that simple. It's really dangerous. So every other night, even in Kyiv, we wake up to some explosions and everything. If someone is ready and is not afraid, welcome.
Well, hey, Alexander, I want to thank you so much for your time. I know you're just here for a few days. Thank you for making time to come in here and just to talk to our audience about what it is like to be in Ukraine, what it is like to be a minister in Ukraine. So yeah, please come again, and thank you for your sharing this time.
Thank you so much for having me here. Yeah, I appreciate it.
Thank you. It's an honor for you to
take it as God's grace and mercy.
Yeah. 所以弟兄姐妹，我们谢谢你收看今天的这一集的谁来尬聊。那其实今天是还蛮沉重的一集，我们真的是看到说，在一个地方在战争的时候，真的不是只是国跟国，是里面的人真的是会受到很大的一些的打击跟冲击。那不过我们也感谢神。在乌克兰这块土地上面有很多的基督徒，他们愿意站起来帮助其他周围的人。所以呢，在这边邀请你，如果你喜欢这一集的话呢，你可以把这一集转发给你的亲朋好友，也邀请你可以订阅、按赞、开启小铃铛，然后呢，在下面可以留言然后我们可以回答你在留言上面留言地区所写的问题。所以再次谢谢你们观看今天的这一集，谁来尬聊？下次见。You want to say bye?
Yeah, bye. Thank you.
See you next time.